Hi, good evening, everyone. Yehuda Shamrock from a very noisy restaurant in Ramat Beit Shemesh Aleph. We're just very grateful. Some of the restaurants are opening up. Take our family for a treat because we've been sort of homebound for 3 weeks since the war on Israel from Hamas has started. And we have two boys in our family up in the army, and I've gone through a revolving door of funerals. And it's really hard not to be down and upset about this, but we know that we have to read the news and understand this time period we're living in through the eyes of the Torah and through the eyes of the Olah. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Rabbi Winston, Pinchas Winston, who joins us weekly to discuss topics of Geula and, of course, the time we're living in now. He's going to give it some chizuk and some understanding, hopefully. And we want to ask you to, from now on, to go to his new website, which is called sharnunproductions.org, where you can read a lot of his newer writings about this topic. And in addition, you're going to 36.org. Thank you, Rabbi, for joining us.
You're welcome. Okay, these days I get asked a lot because of the situation, obviously, that where's it going? What's the situation leading to? Not that I know. But I mean, the big question, even people not so religious but know about topics like this, or know this, I've spoken about these things before in the past. Is this the war of Gog and Magog? Is this the beginning of it, the end of it, the middle of it? Where are things headed? And when I express my opinion and what I think, it's pretty much known from my writings. Sharnun Productions is where I upload a lot of the current articles that I'm working on, and the next question is, how do I know? For example, I think that we came up a week ago here or someplace else, that in the Holocaust, people thought the same thing. The Holocaust was a major event in Jewish history, major negative event in Jewish history. How could it not lead to Mashiach's arrival? Even people in the camps believed that and thought that was their hope until they realized it wasn't happening. Not right away, not near time, and even more difficult was how it could happen and not lead to that. So I'm going to put things back into context once again. That's what's so important to me. That's what changed my life. Literally changed my life. Didn't know about this in the beginning. I did not grow up with this, and even as I learned in yeshiva, it was never a topic. Never came up. People didn't speak about it. The information, the facts. Also, a lot of the material wasn't even available. It was there. It was in our tradition. It's part of our tradition, but it wasn't available, meaning that either people didn't publicize it, or the yeshivas didn't learn these Gemaras, or Sforim weren't yet printed. I mean, when I first started to look at Jewish history back in the 1980s, it was very hard to find authentic perspective of Jewish history, because there weren't a lot of Sfarim out. We weren't seemingly that interested in it in the beginning. We had the Victor Millers, we had Zachariah Fendel, Legacy of Spanish, was very helpful for me in terms of plotting events. But then more and more started coming in. Art Scroll published books on Jewish history and other books that apparently existed for a long time, but people didn't know about. Eba Bani Smecha was written during the Holocaust, mostly from memory, and countless other Sforim. Achris Hayamin, which is translated to English, and it just kept, more and more kept coming out, and as a result, it was eventually. But I think the main safer, the main impact, I think, was that when I actually, which I explained before, which I'll get to shortly, God willing, but he brought down a detail that these other Sforim did not bring down, did not mention, based upon the Zohar, and it was a big game changer in so many different respects. But it's a big picture. It's not just one particular detail. It's not two details. It's a whole bunch of details plotted together in a timeline going back to creation up until today, to Mashiach, until different periods of time, and each detail in itself most have been known and learned in the past have not had much impact on people because in and of themselves, they don't necessarily say a whole lot. They don't necessarily really prime you for what's coming up, even the prophets. Now, it's like different pieces of a puzzle. Until you put them and put the puzzle together, it doesn't really resonate that much. Now, I think I don't know how many people today now online. There's so many different videos and discussions and rabbis and people and generals talking about accuracy at midnight of days and War of Gog and Magog. It's because it's become so evident, it's become such an obvious thing as time on chapter 2:1, which kind of shook the world up in that respect, and we never really recovered from it. I mean, even before the truth, this Y2K was also an influencer, meaning that people start talking about the end of things. They start talking about the war of God. They start talking about Armageddon. They start talking about the Messianic era. Even newspapers like the New York Times and Wall Street Journal, and you've just found articles talking about this because Y2K threatened the security and the safety and the peace of the world. And even though it looked like it came in and went and it was kind of a dud, it wasn't really because A, we had spent a lot of money to fix it up, and B, it had its desired impact. I mean, this is the thing that we have to understand and appreciate all the time with Jewish history. Just because things don't pan out the way we planned them to pan out, that we thought they were going to play out, doesn't mean that they didn't happen the way God wanted them to happen. We can be fooled into that. We can think that this should have been that, but it wasn't. But it was. It was exactly what it was meant to be, to do exactly what it was meant to do, and change the world in whatever way it was supposed to change the world. So, for example, Y2K, I saw a change in mentality because until that time, you didn't hear these terms, and even the word Torah. If the Bible came up, it was Bible, not Torah. But people used the Gentile newspapers. So, if you're paying attention to these things, and you see the shifts. And since we believe in Hashgacha Pratis, divine providence, and nothing's coincidental, and this was fitting into a timeline that I was constructing with this information at the same time, it certainly caught my attention, and I believe it was what it was meant to be. And I think we've been continuing on since that time. And maybe it goes back even earlier, other events we didn't pay attention to, economies following out, the Kiruv movement, the outreach movement, being so successful and then shrinking again after that. It's all part of the master plan for creation, the end of history. When is the end of history? So, the first thing you have to know, the first thing that the general timeline that you have to be aware of, and surprisingly, a lot of people aren't, even in the Torah world, and that is the Gemara says very specifically in two places, the Gemara in Yuma and also the Gemara in Sanhedrin. In Yuma, I think it's Tes Amud Aleph, which is 9a, and Sanhedrin is Ayin Amud Aleph, which is 97a. Exact same statement. The Gemara often will repeat itself in different tractates, word for word, even several times, different tractates. But it says there that the world will last for 6,000 years, and then it will be destroyed for 1,000 years. Doesn't talk about after that or before that, but that's what it says. But it does say that those 6,000 years will be divided into three tekufot, right? Three different periods of time. The first one is called the 2,000 years of Tohu, which means now from the Torah, right? The second verse of Ma'aseh Bereshit creation, the land was null and void, Tohu Bohu. So Tohu means chaos or null or void. So the first 2,000 years are called the 2,000 years of null and void because people they stopped believing in God. They started doing their own thing. The flood took place during those 2,000 years, and you had idol worship, originating during those 2,000 years. So it's called 2,000 years of chaos, of null and void. Abraham was born in 1948 from creation, 52 years before the 2,000 year mark, when we have the 2,000 years of Torah. 52 years old, he started doing outreach, changing people's minds, weaning them away from Avodah Zarah, from idol worship, and eventually in 2448 from creation, 1313 BCE, the Torah was given. the fourth millennium, from 3000 onward, you have the first base of Mikdash being built and destroyed, and the second base of Mikdash being built and destroyed as well. During that second 2,000 years, and the last 2,000 years from 4,000 onward, which comes after the destruction of the temple, it's 240 CE, I believe. No, earlier than that. Just escapes my mind for the time being. I think it is 240 CE. It is a lot. It's called 2,000 years of Ikvet Mashiach, the heels of Mashiach. But that's a long time, 2,000 years. One of the reasons why Rabbi Akiva saw Bar Kochba as a potential Mashiach, which the Gemara explains was not Mashiach ben David, Mashiach ben Yosef, which could easily have been, even though he claimed to be Mashiach ben David, was because of the timing. It was around that 4,000 year period of time, that mark, and therefore he thought we were entering the period of Mashiach. Let's bring it right away. Maybe it's possible. Maybe it was the potential for an early arrival of Mashiach. So the Rambam, right, Maimonides, questions whether the 6,000 is meant to be exact, but Kabbalah explains that yes, it has to be. And so why would the Rambam, who's such an authority in halacha, question it? And why would we question the Rambam? Because basically the Rambam in his time didn't have the Kabbalah tradition to know otherwise, because Kabbalah in his time was not accepted. Only by the few individuals who were fortunate enough to learn it from their teachers. It was like literally from mouth to ear, one generation to the next generation. And a lot of very important people did not accept its authority in the beginning and didn't learn it. So that changed in the time with Ramban, because it became proven that as part of Torah Shebaal Peh, the oral law, and then more Kabbalah began to come out. And eventually the Rizal came along, first Rav Moshe Cordovero, then the Rizal, other big Mekubalim who they revealed more of this information, until eventually today Kabbalah is as mainstream as it gets. And the Leshem, actually the Ramak says it, but the Leshem brings it down to go so far that anybody who questions it and says it's not an authentic part of Torah today is called a kofar be'ikar. He's literally considered to be a denier of Torah. Even if he's doing everything else. He's learning Torah, Gemara, everything. He's doing it all, but he's got a problem with Kabbalah, the Zohar. He's called a kofar be'ikar. He's like literally considered as if he denied a chelek of Torah, and that's not a good thing at all. So Kabbalah explains that it has to be 6,000 years, because the 6,000 years correspond to 6 spheres, Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, Netzach, Yesod, and they are Misuyam. They are fixed amounts of energy, time, sparks, whatever you want to call it. They make possible each of the millennia and give the energy and the material and the mass, whatever it takes for 1,000 years of history to transpire, and all that takes place in it, actually going back to the 6 days of creation first, but then the 6 millennia that follow. So that's the spheros. Now, we've discussed the spheros in the past. I've got several books to go into detail. You can go online and learn, firsthand from Kabbalistic sources online, Hebrew, English, Russian, whatever. I'm not going into the discussion now about the spheros. But the main point is that the spheros act kind of as a DNA, the cosmic DNA for history. So since there are 6 spheres, they are fixed realities, spiritual, but fixed realities. So therefore, the 6,000 years corresponds to that. What about the 1,000 years of destruction? So Kabbalah explains, not really destruction, not like the temple being destroyed, or war destroying anything. It's destruction of a different nature. The same way, for example, that let's say a person grows up. They start off as a baby, became a child, adolescent, and then a teenager, and then finally an adult. Hopefully, that's what's supposed to happen. And each time they move on, they leave behind that period of history. It's almost like a butterfly too, coming out of a cocoon, right? The cocoon dies; it's destroyed, but the butterfly is bigger and better, and that's what's supposed to happen. So that the destruction that Chazal talk about the Gemara means that the previous reality will no longer exist, but it does mean a better one will exist. And that's when the world to come begins. The first 1,000 years of the world to come, what the Ramchal calls in Derech Hashem, Olam Nefashos, Olam Neshamas, the same idea, is from 6,000 to 7,000. And well, it's actually not 1,000 destruction, but at that 6,000 year, that's when destruction takes place. The world to come begins. It's point number one. So you have these 2,000 years and 2,000 years and 2,000 years. We're now holding in 5784, which means we are literally 1,784 years into a 2,000 year period of time that by definition must end at 6,000, as we not understand it. Now, in that period of time, in the course of history, there are also three different periods of time that overlap with these three periods of 2,000 years each. They're fixed 2,000, 2,000, 2,000, but these periods are not fixed. They depend upon the master plan for creation. We're told that it depends upon us, that we can actually influence this and mitigate it, and maybe change the proportions. It has to be true. That's what Chazal say. But in the meantime, greater people than us have tried and didn't. They weren't successful. And the clock seems to be ticking down, getting down to the last second. And there are other sources that basically say that despite the fact that we told that we can, history will play out the way God planned it since Ma'aseh Bereshis. There is a specific time by which Mashiach is going to come, and he's going to come at that time. What about the fact that we can influence it? Well, we'll have to see how that fits in. But then the whole discussion about free will also is a discussion unto itself to understand more detail. It doesn't mean we have to stop trying, because the truth is that it'll happen when it happens. Whenever it happens, that's when it's going to happen. So now what's the difference? So why make an effort? Why try? So we see this, right? This is a different story. God says to Moshe Rabbeinu in the desert, after they constructed all the different implements and the vessels and the walls and the beams for the Mishkan, for the tabernacle, they bring it all to Moshe Rabbeinu, they place it by his feet, and they say to Moshe, we'd like to construct it, but we can't. So Rashi says because it's too heavy. Maybe spiritually too heavy, but not, all those people, they couldn't lift up the beams and put it together? No, because this is the Mishkan. It's a microcosm of all of Ma'aseh Bereshis. There's a lot of Kabbalah in the construction of the Mishkan and the assembling of it. It's not just putting together a house which has to have four corners and a roof. You can't. That has to be pretty exact too, so it won't collapse. But overall, there's not so much Kabbalah. You could put a lot of Kabbalah into making your house. Maybe some Kabbalists have in the past. I wouldn't be surprised. But the average person doesn't use Kabbalah to construct their house because their house is just a place to live. As long as it fills the function of being a roof over their head and keeping them comfortable, allowing it to live and function normally, it's a house. Good enough for them, but not the Mishkan. The Mishkan was a miniature version of God's creation, and only God knows how he made it. Only God knows how to make it and remake it and keep making it every single day, every single moment. So they bring it to Moshe Rabbeinu thinking that maybe he knows how. But Moshe says, I can't do that either. If they couldn't do it, yeah, but we just said it's Kabbalistic. No, but still the merit of that many people, God wouldn't tell them the Kabbalah. If they don't have the merit to know all that Kabbalah to do it, then how am I going to have that kind of merit? So God says, you're right. You're all right on this one. He says, just busy your hands with it. That's the lashon of Rashi. Just go and pretend that you are putting it together, but I'll do it. I'll do all the work myself, and you will look like you're doing it, and you'll even get credit for having done it. But you won't have done it but I do it. Because the truth is, I do everything, even the things that aren't so Kabbalistic, like a job, making a parnasa, getting up in time for davening, helping people, going to the bank, driving a car, making something, building something. Whatever we do, it's just Hashem. He's doing it all. But my hands feel the material, and it looks like I did it, and I sort of take credit for it, and I get paid for it, right? Yeah, you're right, 100%. But that's all God. That's God's generosity. He does everything and he gives us the opportunity to be involved with it, and even gives us the credit for it. We have no strength on our own. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad means exactly that God is one. There's no perud, there's no separation between God and the world. So therefore, he's in everything. He makes it all happen. Hu asa, hu aseh, hu yaseh. Akol. He did it all. He's doing it all. He will always do it all. That's where the world's going. That's where we're headed. That's the master plan for creation, for everybody to know that and recognize it. It's the first of the 13 principles of faith, but it's going to be a principle of faith for the whole world. That's what God wants all of this to lead to for thousands of years. That's the tafkid. That's the tachlis. That's the purpose of it all. The ultimate purpose of this world is to get to the point where everyone realizes that God is everything and runs everything and gives us the merit to participate, gives us reward as if we're accomplishing. So it's not just the Mishkan that God was talking about. That was just a dugma, just an example, a great example, but it applies to everything too. And if you really look at your life, you really pay attention to what you've accomplished and how you got there, you will find a miracle somewhere in the process in everything. You might not have paid attention at the time. It might be a miracle that happens for lots of people, but it's a miracle nonetheless. And if you look really carefully, you'll find miracle after miracle after miracle after miracle. Just getting out of bed in the morning is a miracle. Take for granted, it's a miracle. Likewise, Mashiach may have a destined time by which he's going to come, which is why he hasn't come until now, and why he won't come later than he will, because that's the time. And I've spoken about before in the past how that probably corresponds to because we know that there's a correspondence between the days of creation and the millennia that followed, and we're in the sixth millennia corresponding to the sixth day of creation, and therefore the Chet, Eitz Hadas Tov Ra, the tree of knowledge, good and evil, the snake and all that, has to somehow correspond to Mashiach, which is why Mashiach and Nachash means snake, Mashiach means Mashiach, have the same gematria, because the Nachash causes to go into exile for thousands of years. Mashiach will take us out of exile, all of mankind, back to Gan Eden over time, but we'll be moving in that direction finally once and for all. So it's all connected. It's all connected. So then why should I make an effort? Why should I try? Well, first of all, I have to say personally, it's exhilarating. Being involved, being able to be part of the process in whatever way you can, either by promoting kibbutz galius and gathering the exiles, learning material to do with the end of days and putting it together and making a timeline and writing books about it has been exhilarating and strengthening. It's mechazik. But more importantly, that God says, I will give you credit for having brought Mashiach. I'm going to bring him, and it's going to be a specific time. But you will get the credit for having sped it up, even if you didn't. But we don't know. It's, he can come today. He can come tomorrow. He didn't come in the time of the Tanoim. He didn't come in the time of the Amoraim, the time of the Gemara when it's written down. The Gaonim, Rashi didn't see Mashiach, at least as far as we know, right? And Tosfos, his grandsons, didn't. And great rabbis in Europe also waited. The Chafetz Chaim had his suit ready to greet Mashiach. One day he heard a tumult in the street, and he put on his Shabbos suit to go greet Mashiach, and it was only his son-in-law, and he passed out from disappointment. He loved his son-in-law, you can be sure, but he was really thinking that he would see Mashiach, and he died not seeing Mashiach. And he had merits like we don't even begin to understand. And he wasn't the only one in his generation. Rabbi Winston and other Gedolim who were there at the time. Big people who were Moshe Nefesh, self-sacrificing for Torah in ways that are almost incomprehensible today. And still Mashiach didn't come. So what's the difference about today? Well, within this context, there are 3 periods of time, right? We call Olam Hazeh, history as we're living it now. Literally means this world, but history since Adam HaRishon left the Garden of Eden, and has been continuing on until Mashiach finally comes. When Mashiach comes, and it says that Mashiach is the one actually who instigates, it's his appearance that instigates the war of Gog and Magog. So if you think the war of Gog and Magog is just around the corner, Mashiach has to be too, according to our tradition. So he instigates it, but the main point of the war of Gog and Magog is not to destroy Jews. Maybe some who don't belong because they refuse to accept Hashem and refuse to open their hearts and minds to the truth of Torah. But that's not most people. Even people who don't want it right now, who think they don't want it right now. It's mostly confusion, a lack of understanding, poor education. But when they see the truth, wow. You see right now. It's amazing how many people change their tune because of the war broke out. That's the Jewish people. In 1.5 seconds, they can be running for kipput and tzitzis and everything because the situation changed and changed their mind too. And Hashem gives us siyata d'shmaya, He gives us help. He puts ideas in their head to allow us to appreciate more and more what we have to do and what we have to think. But they didn't, and here we are today in this situation. Today it's a whole different world than it was back then. But you have your Moshe Mashiach coming after Lo Mazeh. Once the war of Gog and Magog is over, it says it takes 9 months to bury the Gog and Magog, whatever that means. It's a big army, a lot of people. And then finally we have Moshe Mashiach, the Messianic era. Now the truth is the Messianic era can begin long before it actually shows up. There's different phases of the Messianic era. I pointed this out before in the past. It's very important. Moshe Rabbeinu, who was the Mashiach in his time and could have potentially, again, been the Mashiach had the generation been ready and worthy, but it wasn't in the cards. But he was certainly a Moshiach, right, a savior, and he was walking the face of the earth for 79 years before he got the call to go down to Mitzrayim and save the Jewish people. And he was destined from birth. Miriam, his sister, anticipated this. And when he was finally born, she believed it, even over her father, who didn't for a period of time. And then finally God talks to him, sends him down, right? Yisro imprisoned him for 10 years because he had, his picture was in the post office because Paro had a sum on his head to get back to Egypt. And then finally Tzipor, married, the whole thing starts to unfold and turns around. But he goes down to Mitzrayim and he talks about, hey, God talked to me. It's time to go out. Here's the redemption. And they didn't believe him at first, but they actually the truth in the beginning, they did believe him. And then the slavery got worse. And even Moshe began to doubt himself and the mission. He went back to Midian for 6 more months, and then came back, and then boom, we have the final phase of Yetzias Mitzrayim. And so once he does it, it's like already the Messianic era. But the fact that Moshe was being groomed for this for 79 years means that the Messianic era actually began well earlier than people thought and was taking place and happening, even though the exact opposite. The Gra talks about this. Ramchal talks about how we know the day is darkest before the dawn, but the dark part, the Gra emphasizes by saying, don't think it's the other direction. On the contrary, it is part of the redemption process. That dark part before the light finally comes with Mashiach, and that's the Messianic era. Now the next stage, the final stage of this period of history of the 6,000 years, is what we call Techis HaMesim, the resurrection of the dead. Now, for the longest time, I always thought that was a period of time that happens at 7,000, already in the world to come. The body and soul get repaired, in the first stage of Olam Haba, and then God brings them back together again, and He judges us, and a person either goes to Gehenna for a little while, or right to the world to come, depending upon their situation, their expectations. But it turns out it's not true. The Zohar talks about Techis HaMesim, and the Leshem brings it down this way as actually taking place on this side of 6,000. So it turns out that Techis HaMesim is also part of our history before the world to come. And there, interesting enough, the Zohar actually gives a number. Nothing else. We don't know when Mashiach is supposed to come. There are those who make the calculation. The Gemara talks about making the calculation. Others have made calculations based upon Kabbalah, based upon Tanakh. Permissible, for sure, right? But we don't have such numbers. I mean, the Gemara does, by the way, talk about cycles of Shemitah and Yovel, how many there'll be before Mashiach comes, but they have come and gone, and Mashiach didn't arrive. That was Achishena. Rabbi Winston years ago spoke about this around 5760, where he says that all those predictions that they made about Mashiach coming were all Achishena. They're all potentially early dates, but they don't have to be. Only Bita, the last possible date, has to be exactly when it is. That's when history comes to an end. So the number that the Zohar gives for this is actually two opinions, but they're not so far apart from each other. According to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, right, he is the author of the Mishnah and the Gedol Ador in his generation. He says that the Chis Mesim is going to last 210 years. It's a long time, before 6,000. And Rabbi Yitzchak says no, 214 years, and he brings down a verse from Parshas Toldos as a source for the 214 years. Doesn't say, as far as I know, why Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says 210 years, but that's a very familiar number. That's the amount of time the Jewish people spent in Mitzrayim altogether. And they went to the desert for 40 years after that, 210-40. And according to the Zohar, that the Chis Mesim is preceded by 40 years of Kibbutz Galios, in gathering of the exiles. So you have 210, 40, 40, 210, like bookends on history. When you factor in the idea that we learned from Micha and other sources, and Hosea also, I believe, that the final redemption is really just the end of the first one from Mitzrayim, because the other four in between were kind of like subsets to make up for what wasn't accomplished in Mitzrayim because we had to leave early, right? But it would make sense, 210 and 40. So then what about the 214? Well, he has a source. And again, when these rabbis say this, they're not pulling ideas out of midair. Not saying, this talks to me, and therefore I'm going to tell it to you like I'm an authority. No, they have a tradition. It goes back a long way. And they're bringing sources for the tradition. But it's based upon some tradition that they learned going back in history. So it has a lot of weight, a lot of authority. So, 1,000 years ago, those numbers didn't mean very much because of the fact that you had 1,000 years left. So Techis Mesim might be 210 years, but if we have 2,000 years of history left or 1,000 years of history left, then it could be anywhere in that 1,000 years. It doesn't, it just knocks off a period of time by which Mashiach has to come. Because, by the way, Techis Mesim is after Mashiach. Mashiach is not necessary. The whole point of Techis Mesim, the resurrection of the dead, as the Leshem explains, is to give us a chance to enjoy the world on the level of Adam Rishon before his sin back in the Garden of Eden, even a higher level. Because even he could not enjoy it the way we will enjoy it later on Techis Mesim. And to prepare our bodies for the next stage of the journey. Because the world to come is not physical at all. And our bodies are. They weren't always as physical. Once upon a time, before the sin of eating from the tree of knowledge, good and evil, our bodies were more like souls. And they have to go back to that once again. So Techis Mesim accomplishes these two purposes. It helps to prepare the body to become more like the soul. There's no Yetzer Hara, long gone. Even when Mashiach comes, Yetzer Hara is gone. The truth is out. There's no way for a person anymore to think evil things or do evil things. Free will's also over at that point. So that's Techis Mesim. The clock is ticking away. You get to 5,000, 5,050, 5,500, right? 5,700, 5,050. But wait a second. We said that Techis Mesim is either 210 years to 214 years, and that's preceded by 40 years of Kibbutz Galios, which is part, it's the ingathering of the exiles. So that's certainly a part of the Messianic era and the final redemption. So we're talking really in total of 250 years, according to Rabbi Yehuda, or 254 years, according to Rabbi Yitzchak. And all of a sudden, you get to like 1990, well, actually even earlier, 1986, And all you have left in history is 256 years. It's 5746, right? 5750 is 5746. So how much time do you have left? Not much. And now all of a sudden the Chesh makes a difference. Because maybe 1986 is the beginning of that 40 years that Zohar is talking about, of Kibbutz Galius. Well, let's take a look. Are there signs of this thing? Incredibly, right? The whole decade, Operation Solomon, Operation Moses, bring people into the country claiming to be Jews. We're not sure, but we're sure enough to bring them. Some go through, bris milah anyhow and conversion just to be sure. But it's a thing. It's a thing. It's like gathering in parts of the Jewish people outside the country who want to now come all of a sudden, and the Jews, the Israelis, pull off these heroic missions to make it happen. And then after that, right, even stranger thing happens. Russia, with its iron curtain and iron doors and iron locks, all of a sudden, because of financial reasons that they could not control, and they need to borrow billions of dollars. And as a result of that, they put Gorbachev into power, and he starts this thing called perestroika. And as a result of this, all of a sudden, after decades of trying, Jews can now freely leave Russia and come back to Israel. And they didn't? Okay, but they can. The event. And then there's other events. The Persian Gulf War had a little bit different effect on history. That was when all of a sudden the Jewish people in America, who had the ear of Congress one way or another, usually what they asked for, they got one way or another, all of a sudden found themselves confronted with the situation that had been unprecedented in recent times, where the Jewish people were told, no, you cannot continue to build in Yehuda and Shomron. You know why? Because this war forced us to have to make a pact that deal with the Arabs, the Saudi Arabians specifically, so that we can use their land as landing bases to go to war against Saddam Hussein and take back control of Kuwait. And it was a turning point. Everyone said so. In America, they said so. In Israel, they said so. And it never recovered, never got better. It's just been going worse and worse and worse. So at the same time, they were increasing the presence in Eretz Yisrael. In a sense, we're decreasing it outside the land, and specifically in the other main place the Jews are found in America. Not completely, it's not over yet, but there's trends. Now, are these trends rooted in anything historically to do with the redemption? Yeah, we have these sources. And that's one of the reasons why, by the way, the Holocaust was different. Because one of the main prophecies about the end of days, a very remarkable prophecy that cannot be taken for granted. It has to be appreciated. You have to think about this one. Don't just hear it and go, stop. And we finished. Take some time to understand what you have witnessed. I mean, how many cultures have made prophecies about their future thousands of years down the road, knowing what was going to happen to them, and then actually predicting how they're going to come back to their homeland. Everybody else basically assumes that where they are is where they're going to stay. They don't write about leaving, going to exile in the future. God says in Parsha Nitzavim, he says, I will gather you in from the four corners of the earth. Wait a second. We're one people right now in the desert receiving Torah, and we're going to Eretz Canaan, which is Eretz Israel, God willing, and that's where we plan to stay the rest of our lives, the rest of our history. What do you mean with the four corners of the world? Anyhow, it's round, but still, the four corners from all over the place. How are you even going to get there? We don't even know what they are yet. And that's what the Holocaust changed. The Holocaust took Jews from Europe. They're concentrated basically to Russia and Europe, and starting in America, in small amounts, let's say in England and Canada, other places that was still to come, South Africa also, but even as far as New Zealand, I believe. but not like it was after the Holocaust, when Jews ran for their lives or escaped. Literally, they're Jews at the four corners of the world, and you come there to Israel, it's like United Nations. It's amazing, right? In the beginning, it wasn't, because we all were the same people, but all of a sudden, we have all these identities, all these nationalities of Jews coming from all over the place. A phenomenal prophecy that's been taking place, by the way, for hundreds of years. The Vilna Gaon and the Baal Shem Tov, also I understand, promoted it. The Gra himself, that became a priority as the 5500, 1740s, 20 years old. He said, the Zohar says, this is it. This is the final generation. This is what has to start happening. So as a result of that, he focused on teaching his Talmidim. He planned to go himself. He was on his way, was forced to turn back. It talks about in Kol Torah why that was the case. But it began the process, and amazingly, going to a land that was barren and dangerous and famine and all these things, and starting a yishuv because of an idea, because of a belief. Otherwise, most people would have just packed up and gone back home. And they were successful, grinding it out, fighting it out till Baruch Hashem, what we have today is absolutely remarkable. It took hundreds of years to get to this point. Other nations tried, they were unsuccessful. And here we are today, Baruch Hashem. But more importantly, we went to the four corners of the world, and sure enough, we're coming back from there. Well, it's not like God picked us up by the hand and took it. Well, that's what Rashi says is like. Because it doesn't mean a big hand comes down from Shemaim and grabs yours and says, we're going. It means that God will make history happen in your life in such a way. I just heard from someone I had for the longest time, going back, I think 30 years, like the last time I spoke to him, and he made contact with me, and he told me that his mother, his brother, and sister, I think they all been only at the Beit Shemesh. At the time I knew him, I didn't even think that was a possibility for any of them. And here they are. How? Why? What? So many people, circumstances that led to their change of thinking, that brought them to Eretz Yisrael. Sometimes it's ideological. Most of the time it's ideological. Sometimes it's for family reasons. But somehow God, He knows what talks to us. He knows what gets to us. He knows what will interest us and make us think a certain way, and keep thinking that way until finally we do what has to be done to fulfill the prophecies of long ago. And here we are today in 5784, in 2023, having witnessed the fulfillment of prophecies that Jews read for thousands of years, wondering, when is this going to come true? And we've seen it come true. And here we are at the stage where the majority of Jews are in Eretz Yisrael, which is a major milestone after all this exile. So close to the calculation and the time of the Zohar, what it speaks about, the Leshem speaks about. And then on top of all of that, events are occurring that, as David HaMelech said, Me'ez Hashem Haisa Zos, Hinivas Beinenu. It catches us by surprise. We didn't see it coming. I mean, we really didn't see it coming. Even though we had some news, we were caught by surprise. Whatever was the reason, whatever, caught by surprise. And boy, did it's the whole world's attention. It's amazing how this vast, huge world of so much technology and information and events and plans and projects, that Eretz Yisrael, the Jewish people, once again are front row and center. Either for us or against us, but everyone's focused on what's going on over here. Because that's all part of the end days process. Everything has come true. All the prophecies, they had not in 1938. They had not in 1945. There were still things to do. And on top of all that, one of the most important factors of all, again, that the Ramchal, who was long before his time, and the Gra, who tried to start it, but was still before his time. One of the most important simanim. The Gemara itself says it. It's right there in the Gemara. Either you believe or you don't. But here you can afford to believe because you witnessed the fulfillment of a dream come true. And that is the land will bloom once again. It's called the Green Line. Because on our side of the line, we made the desert bloom miraculously. Well, technology for sure, but miraculous technology. Great thinking. That others had thousands of years to come up and it didn't. And we made the land bloom. and really bloom. And I don't just mean with fruits and vegetables and things like that, but I mean with buildings and highways and tunnels and absolutely, 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 absolutely remarkable. I've been here since 1993, and I don't think there's a day has gone by I have not been awestruck by what goes on in this country, what's been accomplished in 70, 80 some odd years. Clearly part of the redemption process. But there's been so much negative stuff too. Yeah. I don't know. When you land a plane, it works the same way, right? It's a good thing to be in the air. It's a good thing to be landing, but the landing's dangerous. The pilots, you got to sit down, fasten your seatbelts. Don't bug the pilots. Not the time for anyone to ask the pilot something. He's got to focus. He's got to concentrate. And especially if there's a wind, there's turbulence, it's even more dangerous. But if you get through it, right, it's all part of the process. It's all part of the flying. Eventually you'll land and you'll get to your destination. And that's us. That's us. This is the turbulence. And that's why I believe that we're at the end. That's why I personally believe, you can believe what you want, right? Why this is going to be part of that final scenario. And we have to start shifting our thinking, because everything that's going to happen, already happening, is outside of our experience. There's nothing that we've gone through in the last 40, 50, 60, 70 years that really could give us a full emotional appreciation of what's coming up next. Intellectual, perhaps. Emotional, bits and pieces. Yeah, God prepares us, no question, if you took the time to prepare. But we're going to see things so outside our box, not his, right? Because this is his creation, but it's outside of our box. Expand the mind. Think bigger. Don't think conventional. Don't listen to the media. The people telling you the news, live in this world, function in this world, think in terms of this world only. They don't think in terms of redemption or God or things like that. They're always having to bring it back to what they're used to. And the leaders too, for that matter. We have a Torah. We have prophets. Take a look. Read them. Shabbos, right? Nevi'im. It's not just the Haftarah, not just the Maftir, right? It's what God gave to us to help us prepare for what's coming up next. And the more prepared you are, the easier the transition is going to be. So God willing, we will be prepared, and we will be zoich, will merit to be part of the final redemption, to see all the miracles come true in the most pleasant and peaceful possible. Shabbat Shalom. Literally, Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi. And I'm in the darkness now. I wish everybody a good Shabbat Shalom, a safe Shabbat Shalom. We have good news only, and bring our captives home, bring our soldiers home. And I agree with everything you're saying, Rabbi. The part of the redemption process is happening right before our eyes if we can only choose to see it. This is sponsored by the Miriam Project Geula Hour. And Josh Wander is in the Army right now. He's in charge of bringthemhome.org, Israel 365, and also Israel Torah, where he tries to work very, very hard bringing Jews back to Eretz Israel. And I just want to say, Rabbi, that there is a hello to you from John Riggs from North Carolina, USA. He says, thank you, Rabbi Winston, for the shiur. Okay, everybody, good night, and thank you very much for joining us.